we all have an understanding that the war is illegal and immoral, and we don't support it. But I think one thing that the peace movement hasn't necessarily been known for is actually providing substantial support to the military. The administration and the mass media has created this distinction that supporting the troops means supporting the war. And that's something that I think we all grapple with because we all do support the troops. And so I think that this Sanctuary City campaign is one way to demonstrate that we do support the troops, especially those troops who are willing to speak out and speak the truth about the realities of this war. And it's also a much needed campaign at this time. Desertion in the military has actually been on the increase, as can be expected. It's gone up 80% since the Iraq War started. In fiscal year 2006, there were 3,301 soldiers in the Army alone who went AWOL. And in 2007, that went up to 4,698. So there's over 8,000 now since the war started. And those are official military numbers. From the sources I've spoken to, those are probably actually low because you only get listed as AWOL or a deserter if the Army decides to pursue you. And so there's some people that they opt just not to pursue, both because they don't have the resources, but also because if they don't pursue you, they don't have to count you. So those numbers are actually probably higher. So with this ongoing trend, and a trend that's so important because as we've seen historically with Vietnam, it's really the voices of the soldiers that kind of turned the movement around and gave it power. And the same thing is happening in this movement. Iraq Veterans Against the War are becoming more and more organized and are leading the way of the peace movement. And so our goal is to create a strong base here in Portland to support any soldiers who do decide to go AWOL. And we want to have a place for them. And it's also especially pressing because just on Thursday, the Canadian Supreme Court determined that war resistors from the United States do not qualify for refugee status in Canada. There were two of the first soldiers who went up to Canada who had this ongoing lawsuit and just got to the Supreme Court, and they were just denied refugee status. And now those two, as well as all the other war resistors in Canada, face deportation back into the U.S. So, you know, Canada, not that soldiers should have to go to Canada, but that was an option previously. It's now looking like that's not going to be an option anymore. So we really need to create a basis of support here in the United States. So the goal is to create a sanctuary city in Portland. Whereas the U.S. invasion of Iraq proceeds into its fourth year with no apparent plan to achieve peace, whereas the U.S. administration and the Coalition Provisional Authority of Iraq have failed to meet their own goals to create a stable and functioning democracy, and whereas a significant and clear majority of the United States population believes the invasion and occupation of Iraq has not been worth the cost, and whereas 3/4 of U.S. troops support a withdrawal of forces from Iraq, and whereas the people of Iraq believe a withdrawal of U.S. forces would increase stability and safety in Iraq, whereas over 3,000 U.S. soldiers and military personnel have died in Iraq, that's close to 4,000 now, close to 20,000 have been injured, and tens of thousands of Iraqi civilians have been killed by both U.S. and Iraqi sectarian violence. And whereas the continued occupation of Iraq requires the increased use of National Guard soldiers, depriving Oregon and the nation of much-needed first responders for hurricanes, forest fires, and other disasters. And whereas the invasion of Iraq is at least of questionable legality, as no United Nations resolution to invade Iraq was granted, and the United States was never attacked by Iraq. And whereas under the law of land warfare, the United States military forces are under no obligation to obey illegal orders. And whereas a political, moral, or religious objection to the Iraq war and occupation is a fundamental human right. And whereas sexual violence against women in uniform by other soldiers, particularly in a theater of war, is a persistent and widespread problem that no individual should be forced to endure. And whereas individuals refusing service in the Iraq war, rather than remain in hiding, retain their right to work, live, and provide support for their families, should the military fail to detain them. Let it be resolved that 1, Portland City Police and Multnomah County Sheriff's Office will not execute federal warrants for soldiers who are absent without leave from the U.S. military for soldiers wanted for missing movement and desertion, so long as the soldier is not wanted for any military crime of violence. And 2, no Portland City or Multnomah County money shall be used to house and detain soldiers who are wanted by the military for refusing deployment or service in the war in Iraq. And 3, if the underlying reason for the military warrant is unknown, the sheriff and his designees will make all reasonable inquiries to determine the justification for the warrant before taking the warranted individual into custody. And 4, if the underlying reason for the warrant cannot be readily determined before detention, the warranted individual may be taken into detention custody. But if at any time during detention the sheriff or his designees learn that the soldier is wanted by the military for refusing deployment or service in Iraq, then that soldier shall be immediately released without delay. And 5, any soldier arrested on a military warrant shall be given a preliminary hearing in front of a magistrate or judge within 24 hours. The purpose of the hearing shall be to determine the underlying reason for the warrant. If such reasons are found to only include absent without leave, missing movement, desertion, and related offenses of refusing deployment or service in Iraq, then the individual shall be ordered released immediately. And like the resolution said, what that means is that the police in Portland, and hopefully we can expand that to be all of Multnomah County, will not execute federal warrants. What happens when a soldier goes AWOL, if the military decides to pursue him or her, they put out a warrant, and that means that if any time, anywhere in the country, they are stopped by police, routine traffic stop, if they need to go to the police because something has happened to them and they need help, if any little thing happens that involves police and they go and run your name through the computer, the federal warrant is going to come up. And as it stands now, city police generally pursue those and turn you back over to the military, where you face court-martial, prison, return to combat. They can pretty much do what they want to you. So what this would mean is that our city police would not pursue those warrants if they knew that the reason was for desertion, missing movement, or going AWOL for political reasons. And so that's the goal. And like the resolution said, if they're wanted for any other crime, they would legally be able to be pursued for that crime. It's just purely for missing movement and desertion. So I guess that is the goal. Oh, and the historical element of it is that there is no sanctuary city for GI resistors. There is historically, people may be familiar with the sanctuary movement for Central American refugees. That was big during the late 80s and early 90s. And that's kind of the framework that we're going on to build this. That was primarily hosted in the churches. And there are a few churches in the U.S. who have taken on sanctuary, created sanctuaries for GI resistors, but they're still few and far between. And there's no actual city where people can go. Hiding out in a church is not quite the same as being free to go about your daily business in town. And so that's really what we're hoping for. And at this point, there's none that exists, so we're kind of the groundbreaker. But from what we've heard, there's a few other cities in the U.S. thinking about something like this. And if Portland can kind of lead the way and make this happen, then hopefully the trend will catch on and we can spread this. So I guess that's all for now. Does anyone have any questions about the framework of the campaign?
If a resistor were arrested for a crime, like say burglary or something, they could be prosecuted and then turned over to the military?
No, they wouldn't be turned over to the military. If the burglary was committed within city grounds, then the city could prosecute them for that crime, but the city would not act on the federal warrant that was the basis of desertion or missing movement. So they could be processed for any crime locally. They could also, if the military wants them for a specific crime, then they could be turned over to the military for that crime. But we're just classifying basically that desertion and missing movement going AWOL for political reasons are not crimes, and they should not be turned over specifically for that. This resolution was actually written a while ago, as you can tell, so we will be updating that to reflect current statistics. Also, some of our members have started meeting with city council members, or representatives of city council members, and they're giving some feedback as well on the resolution. So before it actually gets to city council, the resolution probably will go through some more phases and be changed.
I just wanted to add a little bit to what Megan was saying and really stress, I think, the political importance of this campaign. The end of the Vietnam War, I think, was largely caused by a massive GI resistance movement, probably the biggest GI, active duty military resistance movement since the Russian Revolution in 1917. And you essentially had, military people in Vietnam mutinying, fragging officers, refusing to go out on missions, as well as a massive movement on the bases here. And people, leftist papers sprouting up. If people have seen Sir No Sir, I really highly recommend it. It's an incredible movie about the GI resistance movement. Today, we're starting to see the beginnings of that kind of movement. The military is actually way more anti-war than the general population. Every figure that has come out, people who have had regular contact with people in the military. I know just in Tacoma last week when they were blockading, there were a number of people were blockading the ports so the Stryker Brigade didn't go out. They had tons of people in these Stryker brigades come out, flash them peace signs, thank them for what they were doing, and then go over to the counter-protesters who were saying support the troops and saying, what are you talking about? Support the troops. And I think one of the things that Megan brought up is the absolute hypocrisy of supporting the troops and then not helping them when they get home, when they are obviously scarred from this war. And so I think this resolution does both of that. It actually supports the troops the way a real anti-war movement should, and it helps start the kind of movement, the anti-war movement, that can, I think, help engender this resistance in the military and help build it. And kind of what people were asking is, we meet as a group, the Military Resistance and Recovery Group, on Monday nights, where we kind of go over everything that's going to be happening, like the people who have gone to meet with Eric Sten, and some people are going to meet with Sam Adams, and kind of go over little bits of this campaign as they come in and change. And I'd really encourage everyone after this to come to those Monday night meetings if you want to. I think it'd be great to get more people involved with that. And one thing I didn't mention about the coalition is it's a coalition of organizations and individuals. So you don't have to be in an organization to join. You can join as an individual as well. So.
The City Council resolution is just one step in the Sanctuary City campaign. The purpose of this Sanctuary City campaign is not only to create a legal sanctuary city in Portland, but it also requires building a stronger peace movement in Portland. So in the event that we are able to pass this, which we're optimistic about, and we do create a sanctuary, when the resistors get here, we're able to support them, because much of the time when you go AWOL, you give up everything. You lose your health benefits, you have no employment, you give up everything to do that. And so we have to be certain that we're gonna have resources and support for people when they get here. So this is really something of a larger campaign of how to end the war, and to do that by supporting the troops who refuse to fight it.
So who is PDX Peace? Just to give a really quick overview, most of the major anti-war marches in Portland up until last anniversary, the 4th anniversary, had been kind of planned by one group that disbanded afterwards. And that group decided not to plan the last anniversary. And a new group kind of formed out of that space to plan last anniversary March 18th, that a lot of you might have been at. And that group decided that it did not want to disband after the march, but wanted to have an ongoing anti-war coalition in the Portland metro area. And so that's how PDX Peace kind of emerged. The first thing we did was plan the big March 18th last anniversary rally, the 4th anniversary. And then after that, we split into two separate groups. One group that wanted to focus on defunding the war. They had this whole series of withdrawal Wednesdays to kind of really pressure each of our congressional candidates to stop funding the war. And then the other group, which is largely taking part in this campaign, is the Military Resistance and Recovery Group. Really wanted to focus on building a resistance within the military and being able to build an anti-war movement that can support that. And so essentially the two strategies there are deprive the war of funds and deprive the war of a military, two big pillars of the military-industrial complex that we are trying to take down, or at least do our part in Portland. And so Military Resistance and Recovery Group, the first thing we did was Agustin Aguayo, who is a war resister who spent 6 months in prison in Germany, came back on a victory tour after his time in prison, and we had a big victory tour, march and rally with him here and a forum afterwards, which was really great with a number of IVAW members. And then after that, we initiated an opt-out campaign where we went to high schools. I think some of you might have participated in that. Went to high schools, and essentially during the month of September, high school students can choose to opt out of the military database, the Pentagon database. And so we went and publicized that, gave them sheets in order to opt out and turn into their school's office. And we haven't heard the results from that, but since opt-out campaigns have been started in Portland, the opt-out rate has gone up, I believe, 60%? Or 60%?
It went from, it's passed, it's about 63% now. Before that, it was 20%.
Yeah, okay. So we helped really expand that campaign this time around. And now we're starting to initiate the Sanctuary City campaign, which is why we're here.
The City Council resolution is just one step in the Sanctuary City campaign. The purpose of this Sanctuary City campaign is not only to create a legal sanctuary city in Portland, but it also requires building a stronger peace movement in Portland. So in the event that we are able to pass this, which we're optimistic about, and we do create a sanctuary, when the resistors get here, we're able to support them, because much of the time when you go AWOL, you give up everything. You lose your health benefits, you have no employment, you give up everything to do that. And so we have to be certain that we're gonna have resources and support for people when they get here. So this is really something of a larger campaign of how to end the war, and to do that by supporting the troops who refuse to fight it.
I think Megan's last point there was really good, that part of it is having City Hall pass a resolution, but another part of it is collecting the kind of support and gathering the kind of support and getting the word out there throughout Portland, which is, I think, largely anti-war, in order to provide support, whether the resolution would pass or not. But as Megan said as well, we are optimistic about the resolution passing. And just to give people a little bit of background about what we know about City Hall, one thing that was passed was Tom Potter and a few of the other council members passed a resolution that limited Portland Police's involvement in the Joint Terrorism Task Force, federal things they were doing with Top Off 4 and all of that. So that sets a precedent for saying that our police are not going to be involved with certain federal actions. As well as we know that Eric Sten originally put forward an anti-war resolution, which ended up not getting passed because of work on the Portland Business Council's lobbying. And they had another anti-war resolution after that. So, I mean, we have basically a pattern of a city hall that's very comfortable with these kinds of resolutions. And so we'd like to take advantage of that, especially if we look politically where Portland is right now. You know, so we have Sam Adams running for mayor, and we have Tom Potter leaving. And so I think the time, we've kind of looked at the situation, said the time is ripe. And it just would take a lot of pressure and a large number of people, to be honest, in Portland working towards that and putting pressure on our council members to reflect what the people want. And so, as a couple people mentioned, we have actually met with Eric Sten, not with him personally, but his chief of staff, just as a preliminary, take a look at our resolution, what do you think, get some advice on that. And they did have a few comments for us. I didn't hear any questions about the sheriff issue in particular, but that's something to look into. So that we, do have that political aspect in mind. And Eric Sten, as we know, is pretty anti-war. So part of the goal too is to get a different council member to sponsor it. Because if it's him, people already know his position on that. It's not too far of a stretch. So if we can put pressure on some slightly more moderate people to sponsor the bill and help us by taking it around to the other ones and getting support, then that's pretty much the strategy that we're working with right now. And so part of the logistics of it is we have people getting in touch with the council members' offices, setting up meetings, and then they'll be looking at their schedules and and kind of giving us feedback on where they are politically. And at the same time, though, in order to get to that point, we have to already be mobilizing people and already be gathering signatures. And just to give you an idea, without actively petitioning, without actively having people solely holding clipboards out on the street, we have about 2,000 signatures just from people having clipboards at their various events. And an important aspect of that too, which I want to push for the training element, is to get contact information for these people, especially whether or not they want to volunteer and grow the movement, so that we will have the number of people that it takes to mobilize city council. Because once these things too, once it comes to city council, we have to think about the people, as what happened with the Portland Business Council, people who will be counter it. So if we have a lot of people on our side, it'll go over a lot more smoothly, and that's very important. And again, I have to stress, like Megan said, we'll have more people to support war resistors when they come, which means we have an opportunity, if we have a large vocal group, of pushing them towards a position that we like. At the same time, we have to consider that they may be, if we don't have enough people really writing letters, signing petitions, and being on the ground on this, then they might go the other direction too, which is why we really have to grow it politically. They might want to play it safe, but we'd like them to see playing it safe as being on our side. And I think Portland, just politically is a pretty good place to do that at. And hopefully, in a larger sense, it'd be nice to set a precedent for that as well for other cities and other locations to look at us, at least that the effort is here to really provide support to resistors, not just put them at the front of parades, but to really offer them something. I think that's one of the best things we can do in the anti-war movement. It's not a ballot initiative. It'd be nice at the end if we said, here are all the signatures we have, such and such where people are from Portland, this many people are from out-of-state visiting tourists, and they're on our side too. And, it'd be nice if we had those kind of statistics to bring when we do finally bring it to City Council. And yeah, it's not a ballot initiative, so they can be, under 18, they can be a wide range of people as opposed to the narrowness of registered voters within Multnomah County, Portland City Council voting district. So it really broadens our base for support.
I'm a lover, not a hater. I'm a lover, not a hater. Can't you see? Can't you see in my eyes they're at peace?